Around 8 months ago, I made a video on some of my favourite routes in Train Sim World, with one reason being to prove that I don't hate every single thing about this game, despite what some people may think. For reference, my favourite TSW routes are Island Line 2022, Nachwerke Dresden, Blackpool Branches, Cathcart Circle, and the Niedertalbahn. Recently, I had the idea to list off what I consider to be the worst TSW routes, and I'll be interested to see people's reactions to my choices. My reasoning for why I've chosen the following 6 specific routes for this list is mainly down to their low quality and my frustrating or boring experiences on them, but I can just about tolerate the experiences on my picks for numbers 6 and 5. And to be clear, if you do like any of the 6 routes, that's okay. After all, this is just my personal opinion, and it's not an attack on the developers or players that like the routes. In any case, 4 of the routes in this list are Dovetail Games products, while 2 were made by Rivet Games. Coming in at the number 6 spot, we have Hauptstrecke München to Augsburg, first released in October 2020 as Dovetail's 3rd new route in the TSW2 era. Originally, I was going to put S-Bahn Vorarlberg at this spot, primarily for the bad scenery and completely wrong sounds on the Talent 1 EMU, but at least that route features Austria and a border crossing with Germany. By comparison, München to Augsburg is nowhere near as unique. And as weird as this sounds, I kind of enjoy driving the Talent 1, in spite of the fact that DTG used the audio from the Talent 2 on this Austrian unit, when 1 and 2 actually sound nothing alike in real life. As for the route coverage, the DLC title pretty much gives it away. You only get a linear 62km or 39-mile long route from München Hauptbahnhof to Augsburg. It's not a particularly interesting route to drive on, if you ask me, and I think the coverage should have continued past Augsburg and on to Stuttgart. That would certainly make the Ice 3 feel less like a caged animal. Speaking of rolling stock, this route only includes the Deutsche Bahn BR403 Ice 3 and BR423 electric multiple units, with no rolling stock for freight or regional passenger services. Both units were new to TSW at the time, but it meant that, in this route's default state, you could only run ICE and S-Bahn services on it. The Ice 3 either runs non-stop between München Hauptbahnhof and Augsburg Hauptbahnhof, or calls only at München Pasing on the way, while the BR423 only runs on the S-Bahn section as far as Mammendorf. This means that, if you don't have the right layers active, which require Main-Spessartbahn and Hauptstrecke Rhein-Ruhr, the stations between Mammendorf and Augsburg Hauptbahnhof are effectively inaccessible. Even with the timetable mode layers from Main-Spessartbahn and other German add-ons active, the rail scene on this route still looks very empty and lifeless, for the most part, especially on the section from München Pasing to München Hauptbahnhof. The latter is a huge terminus station, but it looks like a ghost town because it rarely has more than 2 tracks ever occupied at any one time. The Ice 3 can run at up to 230 km per hour on the main line between München Pasing and Augsburg, but like I alluded to earlier, she still feels like a caged animal because of the very short route coverage. As for the BR423, the variant included with HMA features a flashy refurbished interior, albeit one that is let down by the lack of functioning passenger information screens. Strangely, Dovetail would go on to recycle and resell this unit in 2 future add-ons, namely the New Journeys expansion pack for S-Bahn Köln and the Kinzigtalbahn route for S-Bahn Rhein-Main. In both cases, the interiors were not changed to be accurate for the real Köln and Frankfurt units, and all that DTG really seemed to bother changing were the external decals, and, in the case of the Frankfurt unit, the door chime sounds. Besides the unrealistically quiet rail scene, another major flaw with this add-on is the appalling amount of missing overhead wires, not to mention the lack of the S-Bahn tunnel under central München. It just doesn't feel right to start or end your S-Bahn run at München-Hackerbrücke. See my original review of this route, published in July 2023, for a refresher on the locations of missing OHLE. And even without that issue, the scenery isn't all that good in general. Quite frankly, I think München to Augsburg is the worst German route in Train Sim World, and this add-on only gets a 3 out of 10 from me. One of the few saving graces here is the BR423, whose motor sounds aren't all that bad. Regular viewers of my channel won't be surprised to see 2 Rivet Games routes in this list, let alone any. At the number 5 spot, we have the West Cornwall local route of November 2021. This was, and still is, one of the more infamous TSW routes, and after trying it for myself earlier in 2024, I can definitely see why. You only get 44 miles, or 70 kilometers of track, from Penzance to St Austell, plus the 4-mile long branch from St Erth to St Ives. As for included rolling stock, the star of the show is the Class 150/2 Sprinter, but you can also get the Class 37/5 in Rail Freight Grey, complete with YCV and YGB wagons to boot. This rendition of the Class 37 has one rather silly issue, namely the plated over headcode boxes at each end being too high up. Dovetail's more recent Class 37/7 in Euro Phoenix colours actually has the headcode boxes at the proper height. On a personal note, my parents actually caught the train to St Ives back in 1998, and I remember Mum not liking the look of the TSW version when I showed it to her. If I recall correctly, WCL is set in 1994, and one of the few things I like about this add-on is most of the station modelling, especially at St Austell. But if these rather modern stop markers are anything to go by, it doesn't seem like 1994 was the original intended time period for this route. Besides the continued lack of a Valenta-powered Class 43 HST in intercity colours, and Rivet's rather stupid decisions to leave out the Falmouth branch and cut the mainline coverage at St Austell, of all places, there are other major issues with this route as well. These include, but are not limited to, the lifeless atmosphere on the beaches, downright horrible sounds on the Class 150, and tacky scenery that results in the route barely capturing the charm of Cornwall, especially along the St Ives branch. WCL is still riddled with these major flaws 3 years after its release, and Rivet Games don't seem to care about going back and fixing said problems. Go figure. At the number 4 spot is another Rivet Games product, namely the S-Bahn Central Schweiz route of March 2022. In this pack, you only get the 26 kilometers, or 16 miles, of track from Luzern to Zursee with just one train, namely the RABE 523 in Swiss Federal Railways colours. As for why the lettering is SBB CFF FFS and not just SBB, that's because the real branding includes the initials for the French and Italian translations of Swiss Federal Railways, while the German version is Schweizerische Bundesbahnen. Besides the criminally short route coverage, there are other major issues too, and I went into more details about why this route is a shambles in my previous video. In short, it only takes between 23 and 30 minutes to cover the full route. There is basically no replay value, the trackside scenery is often tacky, there are apparently major bugs with the ETCS system that Rivet haven't bothered fixing, and there are no freight wagons or locomotives included, so you can't do any shunting in the industrial sidings at Emmenbrücke and Rothenburg. To top it all off, the RABE 523 has really questionable sounds, as is often the case with Rivet's trains. Just look at the Class 385 for another example. It really sucks that this shambles of a route is all we've got for standard gauge Swiss content at the moment, given just how much potential there could still be for great Swiss routes in TSW. Developers wouldn't necessarily have to focus on SBB trains and routes if they ever revisited this country, as there are a lot of private operators there. At the number 3 spot, we have CN Oakville Subdivision, first released in February 2020. The many flaws of this route clash with its significance as the only Canadian route in TSW. For starters, it's way too short. You only get a measly 24 miles, or 41 kilometres of track, going from Oakville to Hamilton in the province of Ontario. One of the few positive aspects of this route, at least in my opinion, is the fact that this is the only North American freight route in TSW where every service is less than an hour long. It is for that sole reason that I still revisit this route, but only on occasions as rare as undercooked steak. As for motive power, this add-on includes the EMD GP9RM and GP38-2 diesel locomotives, each in a different variant of the Canadian national livery. In spite of the prime mover sounds being reused from the old GP9 in TS Classic, and the horn sound on both locomotives being a generic recording heard millions of times in the Trains with a Z series, I still like the GP9RM just for her unusual status as a former high hood rebuilt with a cut-down short hood. It's a bit like the New Zealand Railway's DA to DC conversions, in a sense. Even though there were apparently licensing issues that prevented the inclusion of Go Transit rolling stock, that does not change or excuse the fact that the route still looks and feels very unrealistic when you're only seeing CN local freights and no MP40PH-3Cs with bi-level coaches. Thinking back to the audio, the GP38-2 doesn't have the same prime mover sounds as the GP9RM, but the bell is a little weird. I have no idea why DTG used a steel bell sound effect on this locomotive when she clearly has an E-bell. And just for the heck of it, here's the CN locomotive alongside the other GP38-2 variants I've got in my collection, namely CSX and Union Pacific. The former has 2 livery options. I haven't got the Horseshoe Curve route, even though it includes a Norfolk Southern GP38-2, and I have no intention of ever buying HSC due to my general lack of interest in US freight routes. I only got the Union Pacific variant because it's included in the San Francisco to San Jose route. Besides the crude reused sounds on the locomotives, the Oakville route is also let down by the downright lifeless environment, terrible scenery, and being rather boring because it's mostly straight track with few curves outside of the Hamilton industrial area. It's such a shame that this is all we've got for Canadian content in TSW, and as it stands now, CN Oakville Subdivision only gets a 3 out of 10 from me. Second worst is Spirit of Steam, Crew to Liverpool, first released at the end of May 2022. I've already ripped into this route before, so I'll try to keep this segment brief, the keyword being try. In this add-on, you get a linear 36-mile long route set in 1958, and what I think is one of the least interesting parts of England. 2 steam locomotives are included with the route, namely the 6P Jubilee Class 460 and 8F Class 280. Both were designed by William Stanier and originated from the London, Midland and Scottish Railway. The rolling stock offering comprises both Mark I passenger coaches and a small selection of four-wheel freight wagons, plus a 20-ton brake van, of course. For most of the route, the performance is okay, but it's ruined by the horrendous lag around Crewe, Spake Junction, and Edge Hill, 3 places where you'll see big yards with loads of stationary rolling stock. Elsewhere on the route, even at the big stations at each end, it feels very lifeless with loads of empty sidings and barely any trains running in timetable mode. The stations at Crewe and Liverpool Lime Street are so quiet that they could give the Heart of Wales line a run for its money. Besides the terrible scenery, lifeless environment, and inconsistent performance, another major issue with this add-on is the locomotives themselves being very frustrating to drive, unlike their TS Classic counterparts. Recently, I tried driving a Jubilee 460 on an express run from Liverpool to Crewe, but couldn't even get up the climb out of Lime Street because the locomotive would always bleed boiler pressure and stall on the 1 in 93 grade. I had the dampers and blower open, and the automatic fireman was constantly at work, but even with all that lot, and regardless of whichever position I had the regulator and reverser in, the locomotive refused to build up steam anywhere near fast enough. This same issue with abysmal steaming came about in the tutorial as well, even though A. I followed all the instructions, and B. the Jubilee was only hauling 5 coaches on that occasion. The 8F is no better when it comes to the steaming problems, nor are the peak forest versions of herself and the Jubilee. I don't think this is just a skill issue on my part, since the steamers in TS Classic don't have problems anywhere near as bad as the Jubilee and 8F in TSW. Even the Fowler 4F, a small 060 tender engine that comes with peak forest, is nowhere near as annoying to drive. She's the only one of the 4 steamers in TSW that I actually enjoy driving. It's disgraceful that something as significant as the first Steam-era route in Train Sim World turned out to be this feeble excuse for an add-on. But that's Dovetail Games for you. And instead of fixing, or at least trying to fix, the simulation and other issues with the steam locomotives, they quietly abandoned steam development for TSW early in 2024, after only making 2 Steam-era routes and adding only 4 steam locomotives, 3 from the LMS, 1 from the LNER, and all 4 in British Railways liveries, with 0 tank engines to boot. In the end, the Crewe to Liverpool route only gets a 2 out of 10 from me. The DLC title is complete bollocks because this route does not capture the spirit of Steam at all. If anything, this whole situation with steam locomotives in TSW should stand as a good example / reminder of just how pathetic DTG often are as developers. And now for a quickfire round of honourable, or rather dishonourable, mentions. These are the original Long Island Railroad, NEC New York to Trenton, Arosa Line, Rhine-Ruhr Austin, Maintalbahn, and original Isle of Wight. Notice how 2 of those routes are Rivet Games products. Make of that what you will. As for New York to Trenton, it is off the main list solely for its inclusion of New Jersey Transit rolling stock and Amtrak's Metroliner cab car, although the lack of the Arrow 3 and Princeton branch still pisses me off. At the top, or rather bottom spot, here is LGV Méditerranée, first released in December 2020. This is the only case I remember where I was so annoyed at the very concept of a route that I was absolutely sure I would never be prepared to pay for it. Indeed, I did not pay for this route, but I didn't pirate it either. I only picked it up when Dovetail offered it free of charge in May 2023. I don't know too much about the railways in France, but I do know that there was a criminal amount of missed potential with this route in TSW. While it's exciting to drive the TGV duplex at speeds of up to 320 km per hour, and I like the voltage change you have to do in the long tunnel south of Aix-en-Provence, this route is otherwise an absolute joke. While it's not stupidly short, at 93 km or 58 miles long, it only takes around 29 minutes, I repeat, 29 minutes, to complete a full run from Marseille-Saint-Charles to Avignon, and a little bit longer than 29 if you're stopping at Aix-en-Provence, which happens to be the only intermediate station. And come to think of it, Avignon was such a stupid place to cut the route coverage anyway. It should have continued further north to Valence. Couple that with the non-existent replay value / service variation, boring rail scene, and hideous scenery north of Aix-en-Provence, and you have what I consider to be the worst route in train sim world history. It's borderline tragic that this garbage is all we've got for French TSW content so far, and all we'll probably ever get, for that matter. Although I would still like to see lines A and C of the Lyon Metro in this game at some point. As it stands now, LGV Méditerranée is the only route in this game that's bad enough to get a 1 out of 10 from me. And thus ends my brief-ish overview of what I consider to be the worst routes in Train Sim world, and it goes without saying that I don't recommend any of them. If you've got your own list of favourites or least favourites, feel free to leave them in the comments section. If you disagree with any of the choices in my list, that's okay as long as you don't harangue myself and others who do agree with me in the comments. I'd like to think that the people, or at least most of the people, watching this video can simply agree to disagree.